30 years after signing the historic Oslo Accords, the breakthrough peace agreements are hanging by a thread. On September 13, 1993, a historic handshake took place on the White House lawn. The Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat and Israeli Premier Yitzhak Rabin sealed a landmark peace agreement. Millions of people around the world watched an event that a few years earlier seemed unattainable. The agreement was considered the cornerstone of the peace process between Israelis and Palestinians.
Oslo Agreement was possible because of a trade-off. The Palestinian side gave up in Oslo the insistence on the need that Israel stop the expansion of settlements, in return for Israel giving a concession by recognizing the PLO and willing to negotiate directly with the PLO and allow the PLO to be the signatory of the future agreement and the leadership of the Palestinian Authority.
Yossi Beilin, one of the architects of the Oslo Accords, says the first meeting took place on January 20th, 1993, and within weeks, a first draft was presented to Prime Minister Rabin.
Very soon we saw that there was a common language and that it was easy, relatively, to bridge on gaps. Not that there were no crises or whatever, but generally speaking, we had a partner in Norway, and I believe that they had a partner in us.
There was widespread euphoria on the Palestinian side. The deal gave hope that a new era of peace in the Middle East was beginning. But from the start, this hope was mixed with wariness in Israel.
There was a sense of a very guarded, very guarded optimism throughout much of Israeli society, even for the people who were very pro-peace.
Oren, who was part of the Rabin government at the time, says three factors played a crucial role in bringing the two sides together.
There were three major factors, okay? One was, as I mentioned earlier, the First Intifada, which kind of exhausted this country and made us think, made us stop and think. It convinced us that the status quo was not sustainable. Second was Bill Clinton. So Clinton, Democrat, but very pro-Israel. So there was a lot of trust in the president. And lastly was Rabin himself. And he had bona fides that few Israeli leaders had.
Maurice Hirsch of the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs thinks the Oslo Accords breathed new life into the PLO and its leader.
And really the PLO was almost wiped out. They had no financial support. The Arab countries had stopped supporting them.
Beilin, a former justice minister and negotiator, says a freeze on settlements was too sensitive for the Israeli government to agree to. But for one Palestinian negotiator, the record expansion of Israeli settlements on occupied Palestinian territory is one glaring sign of the agreement's failure.
The first flaw that there was no insistence on complete and total freeze of settlement activities. That meant that they allowed the continuation of the same process that kills the very potential of peace and two-state solution.
According to the European Union statistics, when the Oslo Agreements was signed, there were roughly 120,000 settlers living in the Palestinian territories. Now, the number exceeds 600,000 settlers.
The second failure was that it was an unequal agreement. Palestinian side recognized Israel and its right to existence, but Israel did not recognize Palestinian state. All they did was to recognize PLO as a representative of the Palestinians.
Barghouti says deferring contentious critical issues to future negotiations was the essence of what was wrong with Oslo.
But most important, the agreement was an interim one about interim arrangements without identifying the end goal, which should have been a Palestinian state.
Many saw the deals as paving the way to the creation of an independent Palestinian state. But the 5-year interim period expired without a resolution to the conflict. It has left Palestinians disappointed and delusioned.
Well, on one hand, I feel betrayed that the Oslo process did not deliver what it promised our people, which is a state, independence, and end of occupation.
That hopeful feeling which permeated the atmosphere 30 years ago has been replaced by a dark cloud of pessimism. The hopeful words uttered then disappeared, followed by broken promises, bouts of deadly violence, and successive failed attempts to reach a final peace deal. By 1995, the deal was unraveling. Many in Israel blamed the PA, and the spike in violence made it extremely difficult for Rabin to win the upcoming election.
Rabin would come out and say, these are victims of peace. And within the government, there were some ministers, not many, saying, you can't do this. You can't stop the process. Stop it. Let's re-examine. And Rabin would not do that. And Peres was adamant against stopping the process. Adamant. And we saw our numbers going down the polls, and you know that Netanyahu's victory several months after the Rabin assassination shocked everybody, but it didn't shock many of us inside the government, because if we had gone to elections right there, we would have lost very, very badly.
Hirsch calls the Oslo deal a desperate mistake.
So I think that Israel, to not a small extent, contributed to the failure of the Oslo Accords, and I do say that they failed, since it failed to really demand Palestinian compliance with the commitments that it had made. The Palestinian Liberation Organization committed to being a democratic society in which there would be regular elections. In those elections, there would be no participation of terrorists. And yet what we saw and what we've seen is that in the 30 years of the Palestinian Authority, there have only been 2 elections, one in 1996 and another one in 2005, 2006. And that's it, there's no democracy.
In November 1995, Prime Minister Rabin, the man Arafat called a partner in peace, was assassinated by a Jewish extremist who shot him twice in the back, dealing a fatal blow to the Oslo process. Foreign Minister Shimon Peres became interim Prime Minister, but longtime opponent of the agreement, Benjamin Netanyahu, took office 7 months later. Oren says the government was very unpopular because it didn't freeze and put a stop to the agreement.
I think that his death should have given a tremendous bolster to the peace process. Here was the great Israeli hero who gave his life for peace. That was the narrative. And yet, even with that, the Labour Party couldn't win.
As part of the agreement, the PA had full administrative and security control over Area A and administrative control only over Area B. Israel had full military and administrative control over Area C, which constitutes about 60% of the West Bank and is considered the Palestinian breadbasket. It was supposed to gradually come under Palestinian control.
So the man who aggravated the public against the Oslo Agreement was elected as the leader of Israel for the longest possible period since 1996. And in the process, everything that related to Oslo was killed, except the Palestinian Authority, which became a Palestinian Authority without authority. A Palestinian Authority that is very weak, under Israeli thumb, under Israeli occupation.
Rabin wanted to prove that he was loyal to his promise to have negotiations with the Palestinians. He supported the idea of the partition of the land. He wanted a permanent agreement, and he didn't trust anybody, to the best of my knowledge, especially Arafat.
The thorniest issues were left to future negotiations. These included the defining of borders between the two states, the status of Jerusalem, and the fate of Israeli settlements in the West Bank.
This allowed people like the leaders of Israel to continue to claim that all we are talking about is a self-governing authority under the continuation of occupation.
Barghouti says it was clear that the Israeli side was never genuinely interested in establishing a Palestinian state.
Absolutely. Can you get me one statement where Rabin said that he is planning to have a Palestinian state? There was no official Israeli acceptance of a Palestinian state. All they talked about is self-governing authority.
Former Palestinian Minister Nabil Amir reflected that the current Israeli-Palestinian situation is very different from that in 1993, blaming Israeli settlement building for the impasse.
What undermined the foundation on which the peace process was built was the Likud party, which came to power to abolish in its own way the principle of peace with the Palestinians. Oslo failed because the Israeli side did not want it to succeed.
Reaching an end to the conflict seems no closer now than it was 30 years ago, and many say that sliver of hope that came with signing the agreement soon gave way to bloodshed, leading many on both sides to argue they were worse off.
I think that there was misperception on both sides. The Palestinians convinced themselves that this process will lead to the creation of a Palestinian state, though they did not succeed to embody this assumption in the Declaration of Principles itself. They left it ambiguous. There was no mention how this process will end. The Israelis convinced themselves that they are talking about, at the maximum, about self-governing authority and not about the state.
The last round of substantive talks collapsed in 2014, and negotiations have remained stalled mainly over the issue of Israeli settlement construction in the West Bank, part of the territory claimed by Palestinians for their future state.
I think that Oslo Accords were killed completely by Israel, first through the insistence on expanding settlements, but second, by the changes in the political composition of Israel.
Balin, who was instrumental in bringing the Oslo Accords together, says the agreement has collapsed.
The Oslo process is not dead, and it is the biggest failure of Oslo. It should be dead. There is no reason, real reason, to keep it. You cannot have an interim agreement forever.
The Oslo Accords were seen then as the cornerstone of an imminent peace settlement. But little has changed on the ground. Abu Zayyad says Oslo's promises feel hollow, but the Palestinians should hold on to the PA.
I don't believe that Oslo is dead because the effects of Oslo are still on the ground. There is still a Palestinian Authority. There is still some area, whatever it is small, under Palestinian control. We are still in control of our education system, of our national affairs.
Israeli and Palestinians say the landmark agreements is a distant memory, while direct meetings between top officials from both sides are rare.
Nevertheless, I believe that Mahmoud Abbas is our partner, and I believe that his successors will be partners.
With Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas advancing age, Balin speaks openly about a possible successor to the president.
And the main successor is somebody who is the most popular Palestinian leader according to all the public opinion polls. He is accepted by both Hamas and Fatah, and he is arrested in Israel. His name is Marwan Barghouti. I think that Israel will make a mistake not to release him and to negotiate with him.
For many Palestinians, the 30th anniversary of the Oslo Accords is an unhappy one.
And that's what I will tell you now, a secret. At the end, when Arafat was under siege, I was sitting with him and we were talking alone near a window outside the official office where he sat. And he told me something. He said, yes, Oslo was a trap, and we fell in a trap. And I think at the end, what happened was that Oslo was a trap in which the PLO leadership fell, and the outcome is what we see today.
In Jerusalem, Mohammed Al-Qasim reporting for the Media Line.